By the way, you can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. Just put in Viewpoint with Father John, and you'll find us there. And if you miss an episode, you can watch it on YouTube. In the search bar, just put Viewpoint with Father John, KCAA, and you can see all the last 3 years of shows. And it's so exciting that we're 3 years old now. And although some people will say I act like a 2-year-old, but we are making it to our well into our 4th year, as we say. Also, for those of you who care to, you can follow me on Twitter at Father John Reed. And Father is spelled out, and Reed is, of course, the Irish R-E-I-D. Anything less would be uncivilized. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible, fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing of false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. And folks, as we do here every week, I'd like to tell you about my very personal pharmacy that I go to, which is Claremont Pharmacy in the city of Claremont on the corner of Indian Hill Boulevard and Arrow Highway. Dr. Nikki Ho is the proprietor, and this last week was her birthday, so go in and wish her happy birthday. Tell her Father John sent you. Look, this place is the real deal because you go in there and you're treated like family. I wouldn't steer you wrong. This is a great, great pharmacy that is very personal. I used to go to another pharmacy, and it just didn't have that feel. You felt like a customer, not someone who was cared about. And Dr. Nikki Ho really makes you know that you matter, and she personally cares about your pharmaceutical needs. Also, are you looking for a good barber? Well, Uppercut Barber Shop in Pomona, if I can say it. My mustache is getting in the way. In Pomona on Foothill Boulevard and Town. Go in and see the guys. Leo owns the place. You can see my personal barber, Sam. He does all my clippings. And so go in there. If you want a good old-fashioned barbershop, this is a great place to go. And I want to remind you of my good friend, Glenn Kirshner, with his YouTube channel, Justice Matters. Look, if you want straight information, particularly right now with all things going on in Washington, you've got to catch Glenn Kirshner. It's straight-up information. It doesn't lean right. It doesn't lean left. He was a federal prosecutor, 30 years, 6.5 years as a prosecutor in the Army JAG Corps. So he served this country in many different ways, and he just wants people to know the truth and what power we actually have as citizens. So be sure to check him out on YouTube. Again, that's Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner. And friends, tonight, I'm going to skip the COVID numbers. I know I usually do them, but things are so heavy at the moment. I want to lighten your load just a little bit there. And I want to talk about how big is your concept of God? Think about that. Because we all have different concepts. And some people's concepts of God is very small, that it's transactional. I do this, you do that. Kind of an arrangement instead of a relationship. Do you know what I mean? An arrangement says, I'm good, you let me go to heaven. I believe in you, you fix my problems. And, and that's okay. That works for some people. But then there's others that have a bigger idea, that have a relationship with God, where there's give and take, where you're allowed to ask questions, where you're allowed to have doubts. We used to say in seminary that faith without doubt is superstition. There should always be a little room for doubt. And do you think there's only one way to look at God? And that's a very important question. Because if you think there's only one way to look at God, it's really a limited look. And what happens if that look doesn't make sense to you someday? So tonight I want to talk about having a larger view of God. I'm not saying a larger God because that's kind of egotistical. A larger view of God. God is too big for us to really see. I believe it was Saint Augustine that said, if any concept of God makes complete sense to you, it's not God. And I always believe that if you can comprehend it, it's an idea, it's not God. But there are many ideas that lead us to God. And remember, we talk about this on this show quite a bit, that finding God is an inside job. You're not going to find it outside of yourself. Oh, there'll be hints, and there'll be clues. But the relationship itself has to come from the inside. And by the way, as some of you think I sound a little different tonight, I do. My car went kaput, and so I'm calling in the show tonight. So I thank Frank for being such a good guy, and he suits up and shows up no matter what, and he works the magic pedals and tells me pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's all going to work out. So we're doing that. So thank you, Frank, for doing that. Tonight I want to start with a poem from St. Thomas Aquinas. This is called The Mandate, and this goes into what we're talking about with the size of God. Because of my compassion, the sun wanted me to be near, because of my compassion, the sun wanted to be near me all night, and the earth deeded her fields to me, and all in heaven said, we have voted you our governor. Tell us your divine mandate. And I said, let me do that again. Can you tell I'm wearing my reading glasses for the first time, and so with everything not being blurry, I have to relearn how to read. So I'm going to start again. This is called The Mandate. Because of my compassion, the sun wanted to be near me all night, and the earth deeded her fields to me, and all in heaven said, we have voted you our governor. Tell us your divine mandate. And I did. And God will never revoke it. Nothing in existence is turned away. More tender is the Lord's heart than any heart has ever been. So, when the divine realm asked me to govern it with one simple rule, I looked into his eyes and then knew what to say to an angel who might serve as a sentry to God. No creature should be turned away. Let me read that last line again. No creature should be turned away. You know, we spend so much time, and again, that was a poem from St. Thomas Aquinas. We get ideas of who we want God to love, and that it's supposed to be the same people that we love and the same people that we think are right, and he should shun those we think are wrong. And that's a pretty small, limited idea of God. In fact, it's not big enough for God to even get into, to be honest with you, because that's worshiping prejudice and hate. And it's a discouraging kind of relationship, if you think about it. If we're going to have any type of relationship with God, it must be much bigger than that. For me to deny anyone else the love of God is to deny myself the love of God. I could only experience as much of God's love as I'm willing for you to experience God's love. It's kind of neat, divine paradox that God put into play. So tonight, get a sip of my coffee here. So tonight, we're going to talk about some ideas about this. Now, I want to share with you another poem from Meister Eckhart, who is one of my heroes. He's a true mystic in the Christian faith. And the name of this poem is, How then can we argue? Having lunch in a field one day, I troubled an ant with a question. I asked of him humbly, "Have you ever been to Paris?" And he replied, "No, but I wouldn't mind going." And then he asked me if I had ever been to a famous ant city. And I regretted that I hadn't, and was quick to add, "I wouldn't mind too." This led to a conclusion. There is life that we do not know of. How aware are we of all consciousness in this universe? What percent of space is this Earth in the infinite realm? What percent of time is 1 second in eternity? Less than that is our knowledge of God. How then can we ever argue about him? I hope you catch the meaning of that. This is so big that there's no use in arguing because we might just both be right. We just might be. Or we might just both be wrong and fooling ourselves. And there's room for both of that. As I grew in seminary, I had to go through all the processes of God getting bigger. And it really wasn't God getting bigger. It was my awareness of God was getting bigger. My willingness to see a bigger God. Because I started out with that, transactional relationship with God. That's one reason I went to seminary. Is that I wanted so bad to be good and to be accepted and for God to be proud of me and, for me to get into heaven. And so I fault nobody for that. I certainly come from that. But some friends show me that there's something bigger than that. That this is just a starting point. This is like going to preschool, spiritual preschool. And we all need to go there so we could learn the rules of the game, so to speak. And the rules for the game are different depending on where you are in the game. And I'm not trying to be trivial by calling it a game. But I do think it is important to have fun with our relationship with God. Otherwise, we have a relationship based on fear, and you can't love that which you fear. You can only fear what you fear and try to behave well so that you don't receive punishment from that which you fear. And there's a lot of people that I see who are really afraid of punishment. And they try to say that they love God, but really they're terrified of God. And they're saying, like an abused person, "I love you, please don't hurt me." And it makes my heart hurt because there are some parts of the church that teach that kind of relationship, and I'm not here to compare churches. At the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there are some people in the religious world that really, they have a lot of religiosity, but not very much spirituality. And they're where they're supposed to be, I guess, at the moment. They just haven't graduated to the next level yet. And not everybody who goes into the field of religion or theology, which can be two different things, by the way, they don't always go into it for the reason of having a bigger relationship with God. There's some people go into it to have a bigger relationship with their bank. There's some who go into it to have a bigger relationship with a sense of having power over people. Now, that's not the majority, but they are out there. They're the ones you see the most, a lot of these televangelists. And a lot of you know I have a real issue with a lot of televangelists because I don't think we're reading the same Bible, to be honest with you. Because if you're teaching hate, that's opposite of what Jesus taught. If you're teaching prejudice, that's opposite of what Jesus taught. In fact, Jesus broke the norms. The fact that Jesus spoke to a Samaritan woman in public, and a woman who was married at that, broke all the social norms. This was not allowable. But he was into something bigger. And the reason it wasn't allowable is the Jews saw themselves as above the Samaritans. In fact, when Jesus turned the tables over in the temple, it was because the Jews were trying to keep the Samaritans out from where they were supposed to be able to pray. That was their part of the temple. And so he set up their money changers there so they couldn't pray, and it was them kind of being mean to people who weren't exactly like them. And one of the times you see Jesus get upset, he really got upset. You know, some people like to have an idea of God that God never ever gets upset. Like God's like a big Santa Claus, winks at us every. No, I believe there's things that upset God. I'd be pretty hurt if there are things that didn't upset God. I'll give you a case in point. Children locked in cages at the border. Do you think God was okay with that? Do you think he just winked his eye and said, well, you're all my kids and I love you? No, I think God said, you know what, that really stinks. And we need to do something about that, because that's not how we treat children. Jesus said, woe to you who does harm to one of these. It's better you have a millstone tied around your neck and you thrown into the Jordan, thrown into a river to drown. So we have a lot to cover tonight. We're coming up on our first commercial break, and I don't want to have Frank pull his hair out too much as I'm doing this on the phone and we can't do our hand signals. But you are listening to Viewpoint with Father John on NBC Radio, KCAA, and we'll be back in 90 seconds.
Make a stop at the KC Country Junction.
Go to this place they call Country Junction.
Country legends, all-time classics, and recent favorites all meet at kccountryjunction.com. Make your day a little bit country at kccountryjunction.com and overnight starting at 1 a.m. on KCAA 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, and 1050 a.m. It's the KC Country Junction on KCAA and kccountryjunction.com.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org, www.4pfp as in personal funeral planning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, and you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. And again, I want to thank Frank for being such a good sport tonight. I'm sending them hand signals, but being that we're 35 miles away from each other, I don't think he can quite see it. But he's doing a great job there in the booth, and it's because of him that we're on tonight, despite of my car. In spite of my car, I should say. And tonight we're talking about how big is your view of God. And going down this road, I like to read you a poem from Rumi. Some of you may not be familiar with Rumi is a Muslim mystic. Even psychic, he saw that coming. Mystic. I didn't take my meds today. I should have. So this poem is called With Passion. Again, keep in mind, we're talking about how big is your idea of God. So with passion. With passion, pray. With passion, work. With passion, make love. With passion, eat and drink and dance and play. Why look like a dead fish in this ocean of God? Let me read that poem one more time. With passion, pray. With passion, work. With passion, make love. With passion, eat and drink and dance and play. Why look like a dead fish in this ocean of God? Do you get the idea how big that is? That here we are in this ocean of God. And we think what we see, our air bubbles, are it. That's all we see, our little fish tank. And, my friend Chuck Chamberlain used to tell a story that goes like this. And I sometimes use this at funerals because I think it talks about the fact that God is a lot bigger than we could imagine. And the story goes something like this. That there's these three fish swimming around in the Bay of Laguna. They weren't doing too much. They already had breakfast. And they're just kind of milling around. When this great fish swam up and said, "Morning, boys. Isn't the water grand?" And he swam off. And one fish looked at the other and he said, "The great fish talked about water. Have you ever heard of this water?" He says, "I've never heard of it." So he turned to the other fish and asked him, "Have you heard of this water?" He said, "Well, I know it exists because the great fish said that there's water." So they decided perhaps they better find this water. And so they swam the seven seas and searched for the water in which they lived, moved, and had their being. And so it is with us. What you came here looking for, you came here looking with. It's in there. It's in you. And we could only see as much God as we allow other people to experience God. And we experience the same amount of hell as we wish on other people to experience hell. Divine paradox, kid. My friend Chamberlain used to say, "You are what you're giving away. If you're giving away hate, you're hate. If you're giving away love, you're love. What are you going to be today? What are you giving away?" And what we give away talks about how big our idea of God is. See, if we live our life really petty, and sometimes we do, sometimes I do, then we think God is really petty as well. And we think that everything that happens in our life is a punishment. And there's some people who really believe that. I mean, there are some people who think that God goes around putting nails in front of people's tires, and our people think that God saves parking spaces for them. Okay, if that's working for you, fantastic. I hope you're open to a little higher understanding of God. I don't think God minds you getting a parking spot, but I also don't think God runs around putting nails in front of people's tires. That's kind of childish for a God, I would think. But if that's working for you, I believe God wants us to have great things, but we are to work in partnership with God. If you think God's going to do the whole thing, lock yourself in a closet, pray for a hot dog, and see if God sticks it through the keyhole. Look, God's happy for you to have a hot dog, but God also expects you to do your part, to do the footwork, to go out, get the hot dog, and prepare it. How are you going to prepare it? Personally, with a little sauerkraut and mustard. But you have to do your part. And quite often, we sit around with spiritual laziness, and then we get angry with God. Well, why didn't God do this? Why didn't God take care of this? Why didn't God put the hot dog through the keyhole? And that goes back to having an arrangement with God, not a relationship with God. Relationship is everything. Relationship is the whole deal. And when we go into relationship, there's room for a bigger expression of God. Now, just because you have a bigger vision of God doesn't mean you won't ever be frustrated. You won't ever feel abandoned or ever feel irritated with God? One of my serious heroes in the spiritual life is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Now, Mother Teresa was the real deal. And she had her times that she felt very much alone. If you ever read her diaries, she wondered when God would speak to her again. She felt distant, so distant sometimes. But she stayed the course, even when she thought it was for nothing, that nobody might be listening. If you never have an episode in your spiritual life where you don't know if God's there or not, you're not growing any. Now, that may sound harsh. It's not meant to be harsh. But as we grow, it's never as a punishment. It's to pull us closer to God. God only moves in one direction, that's forward. That's why we can't find God in the past. I know there's a lot of people say, I like to go back here when people really knew God. No, you don't. Do you still want to do stoning of children when they don't behave? You still want to hang people that others think might be a witch or burn them on a stake? I mean, if that's your thing, right on. Get out your marshmallows and your lighter fluid. I mean, that doesn't quite work for this old boy. I have too much fat. I'd burn for a long time. And so we try to make God as small as we are. And what I'm talking about tonight is getting us as big as God is with our vision. Now, we'll never be all the way there. It's too large for us to completely comprehend. But that doesn't mean we can't have some ideas about it. St. Thomas Aquinas once said, we can't tell you what God is, we can only tell you what God is not. And what God is not, I find, and you're welcome to have a different experience. I'm just giving you my experience here. I've never found God to be vindictive. Does that mean God never allows punishment to happen? No, I believe that I'm a big believer in karma, and that may not be the Eastern word. We call it cause and effect in the Western world. You know, you can't plant radishes and get tomatoes. There is a law of cause and effect. And what you plant is what you sow. And that's throughout the Bible. And it's through every major religion that as within, so without. There's a whole bunch of ways it's expressed. So as we grow, a good question to ask is my current belief system really working for me? And is everything just fine? Or do I feel like I'm being pulled to something bigger? And having doubts about where you are is a beautiful sign. It's a gift from God. It doesn't feel like it. It's like the oyster that gets the grain of sand inside it, and it's irritating, and it's aggravating, and it's uncomfortable. However, if you complete the process, in the end, that irritation becomes a priceless pearl. Don't quit before you get the pearl. It's worth every bit of agony. And the agony is not punishment. The agony is pulling you to something bigger. And we go kicking and scratching the whole way, and then we get to where the places where it's good. We think, well, why did I fight this the whole time? What was the purpose in that? But as some of my friends say who are in 12-step recovery, you can't see until you can see. You just can't see until you can see. And part of our growing spiritually is learning how to trust the process and realize that the pain is important too. The two things that bring us close to God is great suffering and great love. Those are the two things. I'm working on a new book called Finding God Through Our Woundedness, or In Our Woundedness. And the premise of that is it's through our wounds that we come to know God. We learn more about God, and Richard Rohr says this, and I agree with him 1,000%. We learn more about God by doing it wrong than we do by doing it right. You get that? It's by our mistakes that we really get closer to God. when we're doing it right all the time, it's like, well, what do I need God for? I got this down. It's when we're struggling that we realize, I need something bigger than myself to help me get through this. This just isn't working too well. And it's called surrender. They say in 12-step recovery, surrender to win. And some people have trouble with that concept. I'm Irish. We don't surrender for anything, Sinn Féin, ourselves alone. You die before you surrender. And it's through the surrender that I die and resurrect and have new life. And it's hard to remember that all the time, so I have to be reminded of it. This is why it's good to have spiritual partners. I highly recommend this, that if you have a group that's dedicated to spiritual growth that you can be involved with, or even if you have a partner that you check in with each other, hey, did you meditate today? How was your meditation? That's good to have. We have that in the priesthood. We use spiritual directors as well. I like having someone I can check in with and say, I really thought I was doing good spiritually, but I'm really struggling with this right now. I feel like God has left me. And my spiritual director can remind me feelings and facts are two different worlds. It feels like that, but it's not a fact. What it is it's time for you to be pulled forward into another area because you've rested on this vista for too long. And now God loves you enough to pull you into new growth so you can be even closer with God. And sometimes it doesn't feel like a great act of love. Sometimes it quite painful. But God uses all of it. Nothing goes to waste. God uses it for our development, uses it for our growth. And pretty soon, we realize that God is doing all this out of love, not out of condemnation, not out of judgment, not out of spitefulness, out of love. But sometimes we need a spiritual director or a spiritual partner to help remind us of that. Because we forget. We get caught up in the pain. We get caught up in the illusion of things around us. And all life is some form of illusion. We only see what our eyes can see, but there's so much more there than our eyes are seeing at the moment. There's something much bigger. And when we have spiritual friends that we go along with, I have people that we check in with each other. I have a group of guys on Monday nights. Every Monday we get together on Zoom now. We used to do it at my house. And we share our spiritual growth. We read some spiritual books. I mean, we've read a lot of Richard Rohr books. We've read some Emmett Fox, a lot of good stuff. One of my favorite books is the Spirituality of Imperfection, which if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. So all these things is to help us grow. Now, do you have to agree with everything in the spiritual book that you read? No. I haven't found a spiritual book yet that I agree with everything in it, but I find things I can learn from with it that can help me on my road. Sort of like a Thomas Guide. Your kids will have to look up Thomas Guide. That was before GPS. And it helps create a guiding map on a road that's not going to nowhere. It's going someplace. It's going to a higher vista. And the higher our spiritual vision gets, the farther we can see. Case in point, I believe at sea level, the average eye could see 7 miles. And some of you have been in the Navy, you can verify that, or if I'm off by that, please send me an email through either viewpointwithfatherjohn.com or through Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. I believe that the farthest the eye can see at sea level is 7 miles. But when you raise your vision, you can see farther. there are some points on the cliffs of Laguna that you can see from Laguna all the way to Catalina Island. For those of you who are not in Southern California, that's easy enough to look up. Just look up. You can even look up Dana Point and Catalina Island, California. And from the top view, you can see Catalina Island, and sometimes it feels like you could throw a rock and hit it. Now, of course, it's facts and feelings, two different worlds. Don't throw a rock, you'll probably hit somebody's boat and they'll really be mad. Some people don't have a sense of humor about those things, especially put a hole in it. But the point is, where you wouldn't be able to see it when you're at sea level, up all that ways, your vision you see farther away. Well, the same with our spiritual life. When we're starting out, we don't see very far. We're not bad for that. We're not dumb for that. That's just where we're supposed to start out. But our journey is supposed to take us higher and higher up the hill, so we can see more and more distance. And so we can see that the world's bigger than we thought, that God's bigger than we thought, that there's a lot more involved in the picture than we thought. And so we rest on a vista for a little while, a view place, and God lets us rest there for a little while. And then God says, okay, time to climb some more. I have more for you to see, and it's going to be good. It's going to be really good. And speaking of more to see, we're coming up on our next commercial break, and even though I can't see Frank, I feel his psychic vibration saying, Father John, go to commercial break. So I'm going to do that. So you're listening to Viewpoint with Father John on NBC Radio KCAA, and we'll be back in 90 seconds.
Make a stop at the KC Country Junction.
Go to this place they call Country Junction.
Country legends, all-time classics, and recent favorites all meet at kccountryjunction.com. Make your day a little bit country at kccountryjunction.com and overnight starting at 1 a.m. on KCAA 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, and 1050 a.m. It's the KC Country Junction on KCAA and kccountryjunction.com.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org, www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
And welcome back. You're tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. And a shout out to all those who listen all around the world. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And by the way, next week, Martha Bass is going to be on our show again. It's going to be a great show. She has some new things she's doing, and so we'll talk a little bit about that next week. I want to share something fun with you. We've had some serious stuff tonight. And since I introduced you to Rumi, some of you already know Rumi, but for those of you who didn't, he's a great poet, and he writes this thing that I get a kick out, so you know it's a little twisted. And it's called Relationship Booster. And here's what the great prophet has to say. Here is a relationship booster that is guaranteed to work. Every time your spouse or lover says something stupid, Make your eyes light up as if you just heard something brilliant. Let me give that to you one more time because that goes by quick. Again, this is called Relationship Booster. Here's a relationship booster that is guaranteed to work. Every time your spouse or lover says something stupid, make your eyes light up as if you just heard something brilliant. Now, brothers and sisters, that's spirituality right there. That's spiritual 101. And, you gotta, just gotta appreciate some of the fun in that. And why am I giving you poems from other people's religions? Because God is in all of it. If God could be confined to one religion, he wouldn't be big enough to solve a problem. He, she, it, whatever your concept is. And if we're ever going to really have a relationship with God, we have to get into something bigger. We have to realize that all of life is consecrated by God. And for us to say that something is not consecrated because it's not like us, another religion, then we really miss the point. We really do. Sometimes it's easier for me to see God and God's miracle in the eyes of somebody who has had terrible experiences in life than I do in people who have had nothing but riches their entire life. Now, God is in both places, don't get me wrong. But I really see the miracle of God when I see somebody who has been down and out and has the courage to get back up. That means so much to me. It tells me how big God is, how loving God is. And, thank God God's nicer than we are. There's a poem every once in a while I read on this program, and I want to share it with you again because I think it really is beautiful. And I knew the author. I worked with her. It's called "Touch of the Master's Hand." Some people know it as the old violin. So it's battered and scattered, and the auctioneer thought it hardly worth his while to waste his time on the old violin. But he held it up with a smile. What am I bidding, good people? He cried. Who will start the bidding for me? $1, $1. Do I hear two? $2, who will make it three? $3 once, $3 twice. Going for three, but no. From the room far back, a gray-bearded man came forward and picked up the bow. Then wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening up the strings, he played a melody, pure and sweet as the angels sing. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What am I bidding for this old violin?" as he held it up aloft with the bow. 1,000, 1,000, do I hear two? 2,000, who will make it three? 3,000 once, 3,000 twice. Going and gone, said he. The audience cheered, but some of them cried, "We just don't understand. What changed its worth?" Swift came the reply, the touch of the master's hand. And many a man with life out of tune, all battered and bruised with hardship, is auctioned off cheap by a thoughtless crowd, much like that old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he travels on. He's going once, he's going twice. He is going and almost gone. But the master comes, and the foolish crowd can never quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that is wrought by the touch of the Master's hand. That's by Myra Brooks Welsh. And I can't read that poem without getting choked up because I've seen this poem played out so many times where people were down and out, where people had nobody who believed in them anymore. And something happens. And their life gets changed. And they experience the love of God. Sometimes with religion, sometimes without. But it's something deeply spiritual. And they feel the touch of the Master's hand. You know, back in 1982, 83, and I'm sure the story here on the show, but I think it's worth repeating. I was working at Pomona Valley Hospital in Pomona, California, at Pomona Valley Medical Center, I guess they call it now. They probably did then. I just probably shortened it. And I worked on 2 West, Unit 2 West, which was the alcoholism unit at that time before they went to a really fancier place. And I was the night counselor. And what I did as the night counselor, besides set up with any patient that was there who couldn't sleep and having anxiety, I was someone they could talk to and share what's going on. I also did the emergency room psychiatric evaluations where we would decide if someone needed to go into hospital for 72 hours or more to get stabilized, if they were a danger to themselves or others. And this particular night I was working, and his family showed up with their dad. And they threw him through the sliding glass door, one of those electric doors that opens automatically. They threw him up there, and the door opened, and he fell in. And they said, "Call us when he's dead. He's a heck of an alcoholic." And they put him to bed up on 2 West. And my job that night was to sit with this man all night until he died on my shift or on the next, because he was certainly at death's door. I don't mean that about Pomona Valley, but but he was there. So the night began. I'm sitting next to him, and he looks up, and he can see something I can't see. But I'm watching this. I'm observing this. This is my first experience with sitting with someone who was dying. I've done that many times since then. And he says, "Jesus says I can't come in yet." And I without thinking, I don't know where it came from. It had to be God. I said, "Well, it's not time yet." And throughout the night, this man described what he was seeing. He talked about all the times of his life that were filled with love. I didn't hear any condemnation. I didn't hear any punishment. He would describe all the experiences of love through his life. We did this the entire night. And then about 10, 15 minutes before I was going to go off shift and pass this over to somebody else, he looked at me and said, "You've been very kind, and I thank you." Jesus said, "I can go in now." And he closed his eyes and he died. Now, I don't know about you, but that says to me that God is gracious. There would have been plenty of reason from a human standpoint to show this guy every bad thing he's ever done. And that's not what God did. God, before having him come home, come through the pearly gates, as we say in Christianity, wanted him to see all the times he was loved, not all the times he was ashamed. He figured he's been punishing himself for so many years that he already knew the shame. Don't you know that these people know the shame? Sometimes that's why they drink. because they can't handle the shame, and then the shame gets greater, and they drink more because the pain is so intense. I haven't met anybody in that stage of alcoholism who was doing it because they were enjoying it. They were doing it because their pain was so great emotionally and spiritually. And yes, you can have spiritual pain. It's the greatest pain you could ever have. And so instead, God showed him compassion, showed him love, something bigger than we humans would show him. That's where I started seeing God was bigger than I thought God is. That was an awakening for me as a young seminarian working on my bachelor's degree. And I was speechless. Now, I had to write all this up in the chart, but how do you capture the essence of the unconditional love that you just witnessed? And how do you do it without covering the chart paper, because we used to do it on paper back then, without covering the chart paper in tears? It was perhaps one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I come to see that a lot of what I've been taught in religion fell grossly short of the compassion of God. And that's not the fault of anybody. We can only share with others what we've experienced ourselves. Having a collar doesn't make the priest. There's a lot of people with collars that they have been ordained, but they haven't become a priest yet. That's not a thing of judgment. It's an observation that in all the years I've been in priesthood, I've gotten to see over and over and over again. I had to experience myself. And I've shared with you on this program, and if you want to know more about it, you can read about my experience in my book, Close Your Eyes So You Can See Me, where I talk about what happened to me when I had my Christ experience, and I went from being ordained to being a priest, because I had that Christ experience. And it's very intimate. And that experience I had with that man that night was so intimate. People make the mistake of thinking intimacy has to do with sex. That's the lowest form of intimacy. It's good, don't get me wrong. I encourage it. But it's not the all in all to be all. There's something much, much greater. Something much greater. And I get in touch with that poem, The Touch of the Master's Hand, the old violin. I hope tonight you've gathered an idea of how great God really is. And what I've seen of God is not even as big as God is. It's much bigger than I see. And nobody has the monopoly on God. I don't, you don't, the Pope doesn't, the head rabbi, he doesn't have it. Krishna, he doesn't have it. We all have visions of it. And when we can learn to come and share our visions and see God in each other's belief systems, now we see God. Now we get a glimpse of God. Because if we don't see God everywhere, we'll see God nowhere. Do you get me on that? As the kids say, are you picking up when I'm laying down? I think I just put 10 more years on my age. But the point is, anything that has to do with God always, without exception, has to do with love. To me, God and love are synonymous. You can't have one without the other, and they not only go hand in hand, but they are the heart and the circulation of that heart throughout the universe. And they both do the divine dance together that fills every vein with love. And when we're hating other people, the truth is it's because we hate ourselves. And when we hate ourselves, it's hard to see good anywhere around us. And I know we're going through this as a country right now. And it's because so many people are afraid. So many people are afraid of the other. The truth is, we're afraid of ourselves. We are. We feel let down, and we feel that we don't have hope. And so we got to find somebody to blame. And it doesn't work. We have to go and start becoming the peacemakers. It's easy to be violent. It's easy to be nasty. I know, I'm human. But I grew up with a song that says, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me." And that is really an example of the teaching of God, of what Jesus gave us. Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. He became the great sacrifice for our peace, so we stop sacrificing others. It's really beautiful. I think I'm pretty close to my last minute here. I'm listening for music to come through my headphone. But, no one told you this week that they love you. Let me be the first. And let me take a moment to say thank you that you tune in each week. And I especially want to thank those who send me notes and share your thoughts with me. Those of you who share your story with me, that share your pain with me. I thank you for honoring me and trusting me with your pain. And I want to thank Frank for doing such a great job tonight and running the show and keeping us all safe and online. And from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of Molly's heart, my new parakeet, and from Gabby too, I wish you a blessed week, and we look forward to being with you again next week. Peace and Lord be on you all. That's that.